They were only 6 and 4 years old, two small children abandoned in the jaws of a Wyoming blizzard. The storm erased their tracks, the cold tore at their fragile skin, and then wolves appeared, eyes blazing through the furious snow. No one believed they could survive that night. But fate had other plans, not by soldiers, not by a search party, but by an old cowboy carrying the weight of his own loss, and by a stray cat as fragile as a flicker of light in the storm. Don't turn away. Stay with me for just 1 minute, and you'll witness how these children found a family, in a way no one could have imagined. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to hear your voice across the miles. And if these journeys of courage and hope have touched your heart, stay with me. Subscribe so together we can walk into the next story where even in the darkest night, a light always finds its way through. The wind tore across the Wyoming prairie like a living beast, a scream that rattled the bones of the earth. Snow whirled in merciless sheets, each flake sharpened by the gale until it stung like needles on bare skin. The horizon was gone, swallowed by the blizzard. There was no sky, no ground, only a boundless white void that threatened to erase everything within it. Through that endless storm stumbled two small figures. Maisie Danvers, just 6 years old, fought to keep her feet against the pull of the wind. Her hair, once golden and smooth, now tangled in icy strands across her face. Her wool dress clung damp to her thin frame, and the ribbon that had once tied her braids whipped loose behind her like a flag of surrender. Beside her, clinging to her hand, was her little brother, Jonah. He was only 4, with a round face turned pale from cold, his lips cracked and purple, his breath ragged in the frozen air. The coat he wore had been meant for an older boy, its sleeves dragged in the snow, collecting frost as though the prairie itself sought to claim him. Every step was agony. Maisie's boots slipped, sank, then pulled free with a sucking sound as snow swallowed her legs. Jonah's smaller feet could not keep pace. He stumbled often, each fall pulling her down with him until she felt the strength leaking from her limbs. Yet she held fast to his hand. She could not let go. The wagon train had broken down before sunset. The wheels had frozen deep in drifts, oxen terrified by the storm's fury. Lanterns had swung wildly in the gale as men shouted, women called their children close. Maisie had remembered her mother's face then, pale with fear, lips pressed together as though she dared not breathe the truth aloud. In the chaos, Maisie and Jonah had slipped away. Perhaps they had meant only to step outside, to chase the drifting snow that sparkled in lantern light. Perhaps Jonah had wandered, and Maisie, being the older, had followed to bring him back. Whatever the reason, by the time the wagons lurched forward, the Danvers children were gone. The adults had believed they were safe inside. They had counted heads, but in the shadows, mistakes were easy. Only later, when a mother pulled back a blanket and found the space empty, did the truth rise like a blade to the heart. The children were missing, but by then, the wagons were already moving, swallowed by the storm. On the open prairie, Maisie knew none of this. All she knew was the storm and Jonah's weakening grip. He slipped again, knees striking ice. His cry rose thin and sharp, carried away in an instant by the gale. Maisie fell beside him, pulling his head against her chest. Her small arms wrapped around him, her cheek pressed to his cold hair. "Don't cry, Jonah," she whispered, though her own voice shook. "I'll find us shelter, I promise." Jonah whimpered, his breath rattling in her ear. He was too young to understand promises could break, even when made with love. He clung to her because there was no one else to cling to. Ahead loomed a pine tree, dark against the white storm. Its branches sagged under heavy snow, but they offered the faintest shield. Maisie dragged Jonah toward it, her body trembling, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Beneath the branches the wind dulled. They huddled close, the tree their fragile fortress. Jonah pressed his face into her shoulder and sobbed until exhaustion took even that away. Maisie rocked him gently, just as her mother had done on long nights back home in Missouri. She remembered the small farmhouse they had left behind, the iron stove glowing red, the smell of cornbread baking, the barn cat purring against her lap as rain drummed on the roof. That cat had been her comfort on stormy nights, its steady warmth reminding her that no storm lasted forever. The memory hurt now. It pressed against her heart, a cruel reminder of what she had lost. She blinked hard, trying to chase the tears before they froze on her lashes, and then, from the depths of the storm, came another sound, a long, hollow cry. It rose above the wind, deep and mournful, echoing across the prairie like a funeral song, a wolf's call. Then another joined it, and another, until the night was filled with a chorus of hunger. Maisie stiffened. Jonah whimpered, clinging tighter to her coat. The sound was not far away. It was near. She pressed his face deeper into her shoulder, willing him not to hear. But the wolves called again, closer now, weaving through the gale like dark threads. She could almost imagine their shapes moving just beyond sight, shadows slipping through snow, circling. Maisie thought of her father then, how he had lifted her onto his shoulders when the prairie grass was tall, how he had told her, "You're the oldest, Maisie. You protect your brother, always." His voice echoed in her mind now, heavier than the storm. Protect him, even here, at the edge of the world. Jonah's little body shook against her, his eyes half closed, his lips trembling as he whispered her name. She kissed his forehead, though her lips burned with cold. "Stay awake, Jonah. Just stay awake for me." Behind them, far across the white, the caravan pressed forward. In one wagon, a woman counted again and again, her voice breaking, the truth striking like lightning. Her children were gone. Lanterns swung, men shouted, but the storm drowned all. There would be no search tonight. The wagons rolled on, leaving two small souls to the mercy of the wild. The mercy was not kind. Jonah slipped from Maisie's arms and crumpled into the snow, his little hands spread out, palms red against the ice. She hauled him back, shaking, desperate. His eyes were glassy now, half-lidded, his lashes rimmed with frost. "You have to be strong," she begged. "You have to walk, Jonah, for me, please." He blinked at her, too weak to answer, and then the wolves came again. Not as distant calls, but as shapes. The snow thickened into curtains, but through it she glimpsed shadows moving, low to the ground, swift. A flash of fur, the crunch of paws on frozen earth, the scrape of claws. Her heart hammered. She pulled Jonah into her lap, her arms circling him as though she could become a wall against the wild. The night was a trap closing in. Each breath of the wind carried the wolves closer. Each pause of silence carried the weight of eyes unseen. And then she saw them. Two pale lights flickering through the storm. Eyes, steady, unblinking, fixed upon them. Maisie's breath caught. The sound of Jonah's whimper was the only human thing left in that vast, merciless white. The wolves had found them. The eyes in the snow did not move. For a heartbeat, Maisie thought the storm itself had given shape to her fear. Then the wind shifted, and from behind a curtain of blowing flakes, a small shape emerged. Not a wolf, a cat. It was a calico, its fur mottled with patches of orange, black, and white, though the storm had dulled those colors beneath frost. The little creature trembled as it stepped forward, its paws sinking deep into the snow. Its tail lashed once, not in menace but in unease, and its body quivered with cold. The eyes that had glowed so fiercely were not those of a predator. They were the eyes of a wanderer, weary and half-starved, searching for warmth as desperately as the children. Maisie blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. She felt Jonah stir against her shoulder. His small head lifted, and when he saw the animal, he gasped in fear. "A cat," he whispered, voice cracking. "It'll scratch me, Maisie. I don't want it near." Jonah shrank behind her arm, his face pale, his eyes wide. He had always been wary of animals. The dog back in Missouri had once barked too close, and ever since he had flinched at fur and claws. But the calico did not leap or hiss. Instead, it stumbled forward until it reached Maisie's boots. It rubbed its head against her ankle, pressing close, leaving faint smears of wet snow in its fur against her leg. The vibration of its purr was faint, but in the stillness between the wind's gusts, she felt it humming through the leather of her boot. Jonah whimpered. "Push it away." Maisie did not move. Something about the cat stirred a strange comfort in her chest. The warmth of memory. Their barn cat curled on her lap by the stove, her mother laughing softly when the animal chased shadows across the floor. For a moment the storm receded, and Maisie saw not an endless white prison, but a flicker of companionship. The cat tilted its head, amber eyes fixed on hers, then turned sharply toward the deeper woods. It padded a few steps, looked back, and let out a thin cry that was nearly lost in the storm. Then it walked further, stopping again to glance at them. Maisie frowned, her arms tightened around Jonah. "It wants us to follow." Jonah shook his head violently. "No, Maisie, it's just a cat. It doesn't know anything." Yet the calico's insistence was undeniable. Step by step it carved a path into the drifts, pausing, waiting, urging. Maisie's heart pounded. The storm had trapped them. The wolves circled. The pine no longer felt safe. It was only a pause before the end. But here was something alive, something that had found them instead of hunting them. Her choice was already made. She pulled Jonah to his feet. His legs wobbled, his lips pressed tight in protest. "We have to try," she whispered. "Please, Jonah, we can't stay here." The cat gave another cry, softer this time, then slipped into the storm. Maisie followed. The prairie narrowed into a strip of trees, their trunks black spears against the snow, branches bent under the storm's weight, scattering powder with each shiver of wind. The children stumbled after the cat, Maisie dragging Jonah's hand, Jonah stumbling and protesting with every few steps. "Maisie, it'll hurt us," he whined, voice thin with fear. But then he coughed, a hacking sound that bent his small body in two, and Maisie realized his voice no longer carried strength. The storm had stolen too much already. "Just a little further," she urged. Her voice was calm, though inside her chest panic beat like a trapped bird. The cat darted ahead, its tail a flicker of color against white. It moved with uncanny purpose, not like a stray wandering aimlessly, but like a creature retracing a path it already knew. At last, the trees opened into a small hollow. At its center stood a giant oak, its trunk split by age and weather. Snow had piled high against its roots, but at the base was a dark hollow, wide enough for 2 children to crawl inside. The cat slipped through the opening without hesitation. Maisie stared, hope flickering like a flame against the wind. Shelter, at least from the wolves, if not from the storm. She crouched beside Jonah, brushing ice from his cheeks. "Look, we can rest there, just for the night." Jonah shivered, his eyes darting from the hollow to the storm behind them. "But the cat," Maisie pressed her forehead to his. "It hasn't hurt us. Maybe it was sent to help." The words were childish, but in the world they now lived in, hope was the only weapon she had. Jonah's lips trembled. Then, without a word, he let her lead him forward. They crawled into the hollow, Maisie pushing Jonah gently ahead. Inside, the air was stale, but still. The storm dulled to a distant moan beyond the thick bark. The ground was damp earth, not snow, and though the space was small, it was enough to sit, enough to breathe without the wind tearing the breath away. The calico curled against one wall, its sides rising and falling with rapid breaths. Jonah pressed himself into Maisie's side, still watching the animal with suspicion, but he no longer fought to leave. Maisie pulled her brother close, wrapping her arms around him, letting the warmth of his small body anchor her. For the first time that night, her heart did not beat with panic, but with fragile relief. Then she noticed it. In the dim light that filtered through cracks in the bark, the floor of the hollow was not smooth. Pressed into the dirt, half hidden by frost, were indentations, the shape of a boot. Maisie's breath caught. She reached out, brushed snow aside, and uncovered the clear outline of a sole. Not one print, but several. Old, softened at the edges, but unmistakable. Someone had been here before. Her hand trembled as she pulled it back. She looked at Jonah. His eyes were already half closed, drifting toward sleep. She looked at the cat. Its amber gaze flickered open just once, as though to confirm what she had found. The storm moaned outside. The wolves howled again, closer now, their voices threading through the trees. And Maisie sat frozen, her heart pounding, staring at the human footprints that told her she and Jonah were not the first to find this hollow. Someone had once called this place their shelter, and they might come back. Dawn came slowly, a pale smear of light across the horizon, muted by clouds heavy with snow. The storm had lessened, but it had not gone. Flakes still drifted, softer now, tumbling through the branches of the forest like ash falling after a fire. Inside the hollow tree, Maisie opened her eyes. Her small body was stiff from the cold and cramped from the narrow space. Jonah slept against her chest, his breath shallow but steady. The cat, Misty, though Maisie had not yet given her that name, sat upright by the entrance, her fur puffed against the chill, amber eyes wide, watching the world outside as if she bore the burden of a guard. Maisie listened to the silence. The wolves had vanished with the night, leaving only their echoes in her dreams. Her stomach growled with hunger, and when Jonah stirred awake, his first whisper was not Maisie, but food. The sound broke her heart. Before she could comfort him, the cat rose. With a quick shake of her body, she slipped out of the hollow, her paws silent on the snow. She paused only once, glancing back at Maisie with eyes that glimmered in the dim light, then padded into the trees. Maisie hesitated, fear clawing at her chest, yet something in the animal's gaze told her this was not abandonment. It was an invitation. "Come on," she whispered, pulling Jonah to his feet. He was weak, but he followed, his hand small in hers. They stepped back into the cold morning, leaving the hollow and the faint imprint of boot prints that still haunted Maisie's thoughts. The forest closed around them. Pines towered overhead, their branches bowing low, shaking free clumps of snow with every sigh of wind. The ground was uneven, tangled with roots hidden beneath drifts. The air smelled of sap and frost. Misty moved with purpose. She leapt from root to root, her tail flicking, never straying too far ahead. Maisie stumbled after her, guiding Jonah with firm hands. The cat paused often, waiting, as though measuring their strength. It was uncanny how a creature so small could lead with such certainty. Jonah grumbled, his voice tired and petulant. "Maisie, where is she taking us? Cats don't know things." Maisie squeezed his hand. "Maybe this one does." Her voice was steady, but inside her, thoughts churned. Every step deeper into the woods meant more distance from the caravan. Yet what choice did she have? Hope was a thread, and the cat was tugging it. The light grew brighter as the morning advanced, thin shafts piercing the trees. Then Maisie saw it. The outline of a structure half buried in snow, hunched among the pines like an old man bent with age. A cabin. Her breath caught. She hurried forward, Jonah stumbling behind. The cabin's walls were dark logs, their edges softened by moss and frost. The roof sagged under the weight of snow, but it still held. A chimney jutted crookedly, long cold. Windows stared blankly, glass cracked but not gone. Maisie felt a strange reverence, as if she had stepped into a place forgotten by time. Misty sat on the porch, tail curled neatly around her paws, as if to say, "Here, this is where you belong now." Maisie pushed the door. It groaned, hinged stiff, but it opened. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of dust and something older. Wood smoke, long faded, leather, earth. She stepped in cautiously, Jonah clutching her dress. The cabin was one room. A hearth yawned dark against the far wall. A wooden table leaned crooked on 3 legs. In the corner, a bed frame sagged beneath a moth-eaten blanket. Dust motes drifted through beams of light that broke in through cracks in the roof. Maisie's eyes swept the space, her chest tight. It was abandoned, yes, but not empty. On a shelf rested a tin of something. She rushed forward, hands trembling as she pulled it down. Inside were strips of dried meat, hard but not spoiled. She nearly cried with relief. Jonah's eyes widened. She broke a piece small enough for him and pressed it into his hands. He chewed slowly, cautiously, but then his hunger overcame his fear. Watching him eat, Maisie felt warmth bloom in her chest. For the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to believe they might live another day. Near the hearth, she found a bundle of cloth. It was a blanket, threadbare and patched, but when she wrapped it around Jonah's shoulders, he sighed with comfort. Maisie sat back, exhaustion pulling at her. She glanced at Misty, who had curled herself neatly by the hearth, her body a small circle of warmth. The cat's purr filled the silence like a song too soft for words. She thought of the man who had once lived here. A hunter, perhaps. His tools long gone, but his presence clung to the walls. She imagined him leaving one morning, never to return, his cabin surrendered to the forest. And now, it was theirs. As the day waned, Maisie gathered wood from just outside. Her hands shook with cold, her breath came fast, but she managed to pile enough in the hearth. She struck the flint she found in the ashes, sparks leaping. At last, a flame caught, small and fragile, but alive. The fire spread, licking the logs until light danced across the cabin walls. The warmth was immediate, kissing her frozen fingers, painting color back into Jonah's face. Shadows leapt across the ceiling, and for a moment it was almost a home. Maisie sat close, Jonah nestled against her side, the blanket around them both. She let the fire's glow soften her fear. For the first time since the storm, she could almost forget the sound of wolves. Then she heard it. Faint at first, a rhythm beneath the wind, hoofbeats. Maisie stiffened, she strained her ears. Yes, hoofbeats, distant but growing clearer. The sound of a horse moving through snow, slow but steady. Her breath hitched. Jonah stirred, murmuring sleepily. Misty lifted her head, ears pricked, eyes narrowing at the door. Someone was coming. The fire crackled low, a fragile flame licking at the damp wood. Its glow threw uneasy light across the walls, shadows leaping like restless spirits. Maisie had just begun to believe the storm might be losing its hold when the sound came, boots striking snow outside, slow, heavy, deliberate. Her breath froze in her chest. Jonah stirred against her, mumbling, then tightened his little hand around her sleeve. Misty's head snapped up, ears flattened, tail rigid. The cat's amber eyes locked on the door, her body one tense line of warning. The latch rattled. A groan of wood. Then the door swung wide, and the wind burst in like a living thing, carrying flurries of snow and the sharp bite of cold. A figure filled the frame. He was tall, shoulders still broad despite the stoop of age. A thick coat hung from him, heavy with frost, and his boots struck the threshold with a finality that silenced even the fire. His face was a map of years, deep lines etched across a brow shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat dripping meltwater. His beard was silver, his eyes the pale gray blue of a winter sky, cold, watchful, and tired of disappointment. He stood in the doorway as though the cabin itself belonged to him. "What in blazes?" His voice rasped like gravel ground beneath a wagon wheel. "Who's in my cabin?" Maisie felt her throat close. Jonah whimpered, shrinking behind her arm. She wanted to speak, but the words stuck like ice. The man stepped inside, the door thudding shut behind him. The wind died, trapped outside, but his presence filled the room with another kind of storm. His eyes scanned the fire, the blanket on Jonah's shoulders, the tin of dried meat on the table. He stiffened. "This ain't no place for strays," he muttered. His boots creaked on the old floorboards as he took a step forward. Maisie tried to stand tall, but she was small, so small, and her voice quivered when it finally broke free. We were cold." The man's jaw tightened. He looked at her, then Jonah, then back again. "You've got no business here." Maisie's chest burned. She wanted to tell him about the storm, about the caravan they'd lost, about how Jonah's lips had turned blue with cold, but fear sealed her lips shut. And then, before she could decide, Misty moved. The cat leapt. She sprang from the hearth in one streak of color, her claws out, and landed square against the man's chest. A hiss ripped from her throat, wild and sharp. Her claws sank into the wool of his coat, her body arched as though she were 3 times her size. The man staggered back, caught more by surprise than pain. His gloved hand hovered, uncertain. He looked down at the scrap of fur clinging to him with the ferocity of a cougar. "Well, I'll be—" His words were barely a whisper. He raised his hands slowly, not to strike, but to steady her. Misty hissed once more, then dropped to the ground, positioning herself between the children and the war. Stranger, her tail lashing like a whip, the man's eyes lingered on her. Something flickered there, astonishment, then something older, rawer. His gaze lifted to Maisie. The hardness remained, but beneath it, grief stirred like an old wound. He knelt, his knees creaking. His hand braced against the floor, strong but shaking slightly with age. He looked at Jonah, at the blanket swallowing his thin frame, at Maisie, whose chin trembled though she tried to hold it firm. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. The words weren't anger now, they were sorrow. "But you are." He was silent for a long moment, only the fire's pop filling the space. Then he spoke again. "My name's Wyatt Mercer." He cleared his throat as though it hurt to say it. "Used to ride cattle down from Montana, a long time ago. Now it's just me and these old bones." Maisie's fingers tightened on Jonah's arm. She didn't know if the name meant anything, but it sounded heavy, worn down by miles and years. Wyatt's gaze lingered on Jonah, then on Misty, whose fur slowly lay flat. He pressed his lips together. His voice dropped low, almost to himself. "I had a girl once, little thing. Hair like wheat, eyes full of mischief." He swallowed. His hand rubbed against his knee, restless. "Fever took her." His breath hitched, rough and sharp. "Storm year, like this. I tried. God knows I tried. Carried water. Sat by her bed till my eyes gave out. But there was nothing I could do." He blinked hard, his jaw clenched but his voice trembled. "Buried her under a pine, out where the snow still falls quietly. Cabin's never been the same." Maisie's throat burned. She thought of her mother's scarf, the red one she'd clutched so tight in the storm. She thought of how small Jonah felt against her chest, how close she'd come to losing him. The fire popped again. Wyatt looked at her, and for the first time, the steel in his eyes softened. "You need to go," he said, but his voice wavered, the command hollow. Maisie shook her head. "We'll freeze." The words spilled out, cracked but steady. Wyatt shut his eyes. He stayed still, the firelight trembling across his face. At last, he exhaled, long and heavy. He opened his eyes again, and in them lingered the ghost of the man he once was. "Stay," he said, "just for tonight." Relief swelled in Maisie's chest so sharp it hurt. Jonah sagged against her side, his small body trembling. Misty let out a low purr as if claiming victory. But outside, the world did not rest. Wyatt turned toward the window. Frost coated the glass, thin but stubborn. He scraped it away with the back of his hand, leaning close. His breath fogged the pain. Tracks. He pressed his lips into a line. "Wolves," he said. Maisie stiffened. "How many?" "Plenty." His voice was grim. "Circling already." The fire's glow did nothing to ease the chill that crept back into the cabin. Jonah whimpered, pulling the blanket tight. Wyatt let the curtain drop back over the window. His hand fell to the revolver at his belt, the leather worn soft from years of use. "They'll be back," he said quietly, his voice the weight of a verdict. "When night falls." And Maisie knew, as the last gray light slipped behind the pines, that the storm outside was only the beginning of the danger waiting for them. Night locked the forest tight, as if iron gates had swung shut around the cabin. The pines stood like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Snow whispered down in restless veils, muting every sound except the wind, which rose and fell like a mournful choir. Inside, the fire sputtered bravely, but its glow seemed small against the immensity of the dark pressing on all sides. The shadows it cast jittered across the log walls, dancing over Wyatt's gaunt features as he sat near the hearth, revolver laid across his knee. His pale eyes glinted in the flicker, steady and cold. Maisie crouched with Jonah under the blanket, feeding sticks carefully into the fire, her small fingers trembling. Misty lay flat near the door, tail twitching, her ears taut to every sound. The cabin felt alive, breathing with them, creaking against the weight of the night. Then it came. A howl, long and low, breaking the silence like glass. It carried through the trees, winding around the cabin, threading into their bones. Jonah whimpered and buried his face against Maisie's arm. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "They've come," he muttered. Another howl rose, then another, sharper, closer. Soon the night was riddled with them, 100 voices in cruel harmony. The wolves had formed their circle. Maisie dared a glance at the window. The shutters rattled in the wind. Beyond them, she caught a glint. 2 yellow eyes, quick as sparks, gone in an instant. Her breath caught. Misty growled, low and constant, her fur bristling along her spine. The first thud struck the door. The wood shuddered. Dust fell from the rafters. Jonah cried out, clutching Maisie with shaking hands. Wyatt rose, every motion deliberate. He pulled the revolver back with a click that seemed too small against the roar of what waited outside. Another blow, a frenzy of claws. The door groaned under their force, snow puffing in through the cracks. The snarls outside swelled into frenzy. "Stay back," Wyatt said, his voice like iron. Maisie nodded, though her knees buckled. The air stank of fear. Her chest rose and fell fast, but inside her something new pressed upward, something between terror and defiance. The wolves struck again. A muzzle forced its way through the bottom crack, teeth flashing, saliva spraying. Jonah screamed as it clamped onto the blanket, jerking his small body forward. "Jonah!" Maisie's cry tore her throat raw. She lunged, seizing his arm, pulling back with all her strength. The wolf's growl rattled the walls, its eyes glinting red in the firelight. Then Misty launched. The little calico became a streak of fury, her body colliding with the wolf's face. Claws raked, teeth sank into tender flesh near its eye. The beast howled, jerking back, blood spattering on the snow outside. Jonah tumbled into Maisie's arms. She held him, gasping, tears burning her frozen cheeks. Misty landed, her body arched, fur wild, hissing with a force that filled the room like thunder. Wyatt fired. The shot cracked the air, deafening. The wolf yelped and staggered, dragging itself away from the door. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the pack roared louder, their snarls overlapping, enraged. "They're not leaving," Wyatt said darkly. "Not tonight." Maisie's fingers clutched Jonah's hand, but her gaze turned to the fire. Sparks leapt, a wild dance of light. She thought of her mother's scarf, crimson against the snow, and of her father's words she once overheard. "Keep the light. It will keep you." She grabbed a log, wrapped cloth around its end, and thrust it into the fire. Flames leapt up, hungry. When she pulled it free, the torch blazed, its light spilling over her face. Her arms shook, but her eyes burned. Wyatt blinked at her. "Girl." "I can help," Maisie whispered, though her voice carried steady. Another crash at the window. Snarls erupted, claws scraping wood. Maisie ran to it, thrusting the torch close. Firelight flared on the glass. Beyond, a wolf's face gleamed, lips curled back, eyes glowing. She swung hard, the flames licked the frame. The beast snarled and withdrew. Maisie gasped, heart hammering, but she held the torch higher, refusing to drop it. Jonah stared at her in awe, his fear melting into something else. Trust. Wyatt's eyes softened just for a moment. She looked too much like the daughter he once held in this same firelight. His hand steadied on the revolver. Outside, the wolves shifted, their shadows blurred through the snow. Then, a deeper growl rumbled, harsh and commanding. The pack stilled. The leader stepped forward. It was larger than the rest, a mass of scars and muscle, its breath pluming white in the frigid air. One eye was milky and blind, but the other burned like molten gold. Its gait was heavy, deliberate, each step pounding into the snow until even the cabin seemed to quake. Blood streaked its flank from an old wound, fueling its rage. The wolves parted for it, lowering their heads. The alpha's gaze locked on the cabin. It snarled, lips curling over yellow fangs, and lunged. The door buckled. Wood splintered, nails screamed. The whole cabin shook, dust and snow falling from the rafters. Maisie staggered back, torch wavering. Jonah clung to her waist. Misty hissed, her body a small shield before them. Wyatt raised the revolver and fired. The bullet struck the doorframe inches from the beast's skull. The alpha recoiled, then roared with greater fury, slamming again. The cabin rang like a drum under its assault. Another strike. The hinges shrieked. The fire guttered with the rush of wind. "Maisie," Wyatt barked, "keep that flame up. That light's our only chance." She lifted the torch high, the fire bright, her arms trembling but unyielding. Jonah pressed tighter to her side, whispering her name like a prayer. The alpha lunged once more. With a thunderous crash, the door shattered inward. Splinters flew. Snow and cold rushed in with the pack. Yellow eyes filled the dark. Snarls erupted, teeth gleamed. Wolves surged through the breach, shadows of fury. Wyatt squared his shoulders. His revolver felt heavy, too heavy. He counted the weight of the bullets left. 3, no more. And against them, an army. The world shattered with the crack of rifles. Sharp, searing blasts split the night, echoing through the pines like thunder rolling down the mountainside. For one frozen heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop inside the cabin. Maisie's hands, clutched tightly around the torch, trembled but did not fall. Jonah buried his face against Wyatt's shoulder, the boy's tiny frame shaking with the raw instinct of a child who had stared too closely into death's open jaws. Misty's calico fur bristled in the firelight, a living streak of defiance against the darkness. Outside, the wolves faltered. Their eyes, glowing silver in the night, flickered with sudden unease. The gunfire rang again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable shout of men's voices. The pack leader, scarred across the muzzle, snarled once more, torn between rage and survival. Then, with a final lunge toward the cabin's door, it wheeled away into the snow. The others broke with it, shadows scattering, vanishing into the endless white as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. Wyatt exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His rifle, down to its last 2 bullets, lowered slowly. His old hands shook, but not just from age or strain. He looked to Maisie, her small figure standing rigid by the fire, torch still high, her green eyes fierce despite the fear that must have been clawing at her insides. Something in him tightened and softened all at once. He had seen courage in men, in soldiers, in riders who faced storms and steel, but never had he seen it burn so pure in someone so young. The cabin door burst open. Snow flurried in with the figures of men wrapped in thick coats, their faces drawn with exhaustion, their eyes wide with disbelief. Lantern lights swung wildly in their hands, casting long arcs across the timber walls. "Dear God," whispered one, his voice breaking as he took in the sight of the children. It was Thomas, the wagon leader, his weathered face crumpling like brittle parchment. Lines of hardship carved deep into his brow melted into tears as he fell to his knees before Maisie and Jonah. He reached for them, his hands trembling, his whole body shuddering as though the weight of his guilt would break him in two. "We thought you were gone, lost to the storm," his voice cracked again. "I told myself no child could survive out here." Maisie hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, Jonah clinging to her hand. The girl's face was streaked with soot and tears, but in her eyes there was a glow that seemed to cut through the dark. She nodded once, almost as if to say, "We lived. We held on." Behind Thomas, other settlers pressed close, their eyes wide, some weeping openly. One woman with dark braids and cracked lips pressed her hand to her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. Another young man dropped to his knees beside Wyatt, his face pale with awe. It was a reunion painted in raw trembling. Strokes. Grief giving way to relief. The human heart proving it could break and mend in the same breath. Wyatt leaned back against the wall, letting the scene unfold. His chest ached, not just from the night's ordeal, but from the flood of memory the children's salvation stirred in him. Once, long ago, he had failed to keep fever from taking his own little girl. He had sat helpless beside her bed, watching breath fade from her lips, the fire in her hair dulled to ash. Tonight, against wolves and storms and his own doubts, he had not failed. Not entirely. Thomas turned to him, rising slowly. His voice shook with reverence. "Mercer, I owe you more than words. Whatever you ask, whatever you need, the wagon train will give it." Wyatt's mouth tightened. He looked away, his gaze catching on the calico cat as she perched upon the hearth, licking blood from one paw, her small body still trembling from the fight. "Keep your rewards," Wyatt said, his tone low but steady. "I'll take nothing but her." The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes following his gesture. Misty lifted her head, ears flicking, amber eyes narrowing as if she understood. She patted softly toward the children, pressing against Maisie's leg, her tail curling around Jonah's arm. Maisie's face lit faintly, relief softening her tired features. "She saved us," the girl whispered. "Aye," Wyatt answered, a roughness in his throat. "She's your guardian now, and maybe mine too." The firelight cracked, warm against the shadows, sealing the words with a kind of vow. From the doorway came a cry, shrill and broken. "Maisie! Jonah!" The crowd parted as a woman stumbled in, her shawl torn by the storm, her cheeks raw with windburn. Clara Danvers, her frame slight, her blonde hair tangled and crusted with frost, her blue eyes wild with desperation, threw herself forward. She fell to her knees, arms flung wide, gathering the children against her chest. Maisie let out a sound that was part sob, part laughter, muffled against her mother's coat. Jonah whimpered once before burrowing deep into her embrace. Clara clutched them so tightly it seemed she feared they might dissolve into the air if she let go. Her tears streamed unchecked down her face, freezing in the cold as quickly as they fell. She kissed their foreheads, their hair, whispering their names again and again like a prayer made flesh. Thomas turned his head, ashamed of the guilt that washed through him. Others looked away, letting the moment belong only to mother and child. Wyatt watched, his weathered face unreadable in the firelight. Then Maisie shifted. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. She parted from her mother's embrace just enough to step closer to the old cowboy. And with a small, unshaken voice, she whispered a word that struck like a bell inside him. Grandpa. The cabin seemed to still be there. The fire's crackle softened. Even the storm outside quieted for that breathless instant. Wyatt's throat worked, his lips parting but no sound coming. His eyes, long hardened by years of loss, blurred with sudden stinging heat. He turned his head slightly, as if to hide it, but Maisie's gaze held him, unyielding, innocent. He lowered himself slowly, painfully, until he knelt before her, the joints of his old knees grinding like stones. One calloused hand reached out and rested gently atop her small shoulder. "Reckon I could be that," he murmured, his voice rough with the tremor of something long buried. The moment lingered, fragile and holy, until Clara gathered them all close again, her eyes meeting Wyatt's with silent gratitude. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition of a bond forged not by blood, but by survival, by love that had endured the storm. Morning came at last. The blizzard had broken. Dawn spilled pale gold across the Wyoming plains, the snowdrifts gleaming like rivers of silver. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney into the clear sky, a fragile banner of survival. Settlers bustled outside, tending to wagons, their laughter carrying on the crisp air, brittle yet unshakably alive. On the porch, Maisie stood with Jonah at her side, Misty perched proudly on her small shoulder. The cat's fur glowed in the light, her amber eyes scanning the horizon like a sentinel. Maisie lifted her chin toward the rising sun, its warmth faint but growing, a promise laid gently upon the frozen land. Behind them, Wyatt sat on the step, his weathered hands folded loosely, his gaze fixed on the children as if trying to etch them into memory. He felt the stir of something he thought long gone, hope, not the wild, blinding kind of youth, but the quiet, enduring hope of a man who had seen the worst and still believed in tomorrow. The storm had not won. Life had. In the storm, we saw more than snow and shadows. We witnessed a little girl who stood her ground when fear tried to break her, a boy who found safety in her arms, a weathered cowboy who rediscovered the warmth of family, and a stray cat whose loyalty turned strangers into kin. Life reminds us that salvation doesn't always come in grand gestures. It comes in the smallest of guardians, in the courage of a child's hand, in the chance to begin again even after loss. And sometimes, the family we need finds us in the most unexpected of places. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what part truly moved you and why it stayed with you. We love hearing your voices across the miles. Share this tale with someone who believes in hope after hardship, and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey waiting just beyond the horizon.